After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the Whitetail Woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light, go further, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, I'm joined by Jared Van Hees, host of the Habitat podcast, to discuss small property land improvements, soil conserving food plot practices, and more. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And this week on the show, we are continuing Habitat Month. And joining me today is Jared Van Hees. He's the host of the Habitat podcast. He's the co-owner of Vitalize Seed. He's a land consultant, and he is a real-life practitioner of small property land management strategies. He owns a 15-acre property and a 70-acre property, both in Michigan, that he's been building into these little whitetail and wildlife meccas, while, also having some really darn good hunting, considering the size of that. And I mean, 15 acres. 15 acres, that's it. And he's loving it, and he's having success and having fun. And, that's about as affordable as a start as you could imagine when it comes to, getting a whitetail property and doing stuff with it. And it's working for him. So that's what I'm really geeked about today, is talking through, these land management ideas that are applicable, I'd say, for anyone. You don't need hundreds or thousands of acres. You don't need big tractors. You don't need fancy equipment to do any of the stuff you're going to hear about today. And I find that empowering. I find that exciting for a lot of us, like me, maybe like you, who don't have a bunch of land or fancy equipment. So that said, Jared brings this really helpful kind of everyman's perspective, and a lot of insight, gleaned not just from his years of personal experience, but also from the fact that, on his podcast, he's interviewing dozens and dozens of the best whitetail habitat gurus around. So with that in mind, today I chat with Jared about the importance of creating dynamite cover on a small property and how he's done that. We talk about building better access routes, and so, how key that is in these kinds of situations. We talk about a bunch of different screening ideas, how to create food plot screens, how to screen access routes, all that kind of stuff, how to make deer feel more secure on a small property and keep them there. We discuss soil-friendly food plotting, what the benefits of that are, how to plant no-till without a tractor or drill, and a bunch of stuff like that. So I enjoyed this chat. I really think you will too. If you do, be sure to check out the rest of Jared's work. He's a good guy and a great resource. So without further ado, I say we get into week 2 of Habitat Month. Let's go. All right, with me on the line now is a fellow Michigander, Mr. Jared Van Hees. Jared, thank you for joining me.
Mark, good to talk to you again, sir. I appreciate you having me on. I want to thank you. You've built quite the platform here, and I've been a long-time listener. So well done, and thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's been cool to get to spend a little more time with you here in the more recent past. You're someone who I have known of for a long, long time. I think, either through Wired to Hunt, you'd reached out to me at some point through social media or something. And then I think we started bumping into each other at at like QDMA events or gosh, I'm trying to remember what the first thing was where I bumped into you, but it was either BHA or NDA or QDMA, and you did some stuff with my buddy Furter, I think, at some point with QDMA, and then we were at the back 40 Field of Fork stuff. I bumped into you there, I think, one of those times. And then you were my knight in shining armor last year, helping me out with some food plot challenges I had of my own. And so you came in a big way, helped me find someone with some equipment that that would help me get some food plots into a tough spot with weed issues. So it's been nice getting to spend some time, getting to talk more. And I figured, I was thinking about what I wanted to do this month, which is Habitat Month here on the podcast. You were a guy that I knew, like, this, we have to have you on. It's time to talk to Jared. You've got a really interesting set of personal experiences, and then you layer on top of that the fact that you run your own podcast, talking to all sorts of different people about habitat improvement. I think that gives you this very interesting foundation to talk about these things. Your personal plus then like what you've consumed from all these people, and that's why I'm glad to do this. So pressure's on, Jared, because I'm thinking this is going to be a good chat. So that said, you just told me before we started recording that you broke your collarbone, right?
Oh boy.
And
yes.
So broke your collarbone, trying to impress your kid, skiing, or was it skiing or snowboarding?
It was skiing.
Okay, skiing. And you've got like a 2 to 3 month recovery period now during the winter. Right out the gate, I got to know, are your habitat projects screwed? Like, is your whole plan for this year like kaput? Did you have these big plans and dreams of what you're going to do in this kind of late winter, early spring time period, and now you're picking up the pieces and trying to struggle with what you're going to do? Or are you not worried about it at all and you've got a plan to get past this? Where's your head at?
Oh man, no, I'm crying over here. I'm sitting here in tears. We talk about this stuff all year long, and we talk about a lot of deer hunting too. But January 1st, it's time to fire up that saw for me usually and get out there. And oh man, I am bummed. So I was trying to be a hot shot in front of my son. He's 4, and I screwed that up. Broke the collarbone up north skiing. My wife is not very happy about that, and it's just inconvenience to do about anything. But what's cool is I can still go visit some of our client properties and help them out by walking around and making our plans. But to your point, yes, I had projects down here. I had projects up north. A lot of it with a saw, opening up food plots, edge feathering, the whole gambit. And now I'm supposed to do nothing for like 3 months. And I'm not a guy who sits around very often, for more than like an hour. So I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm still learning how to cope, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, hopefully talking about habitat stuff scratches the itch a little bit, because you still get to do that quite a bit. And today we'll do some of that too. So one of the big things, Jared, I like about your story and I like about what you bring to the table is that you have this personal experience working small properties. Like so many of the habitat gurus out there, they've got tons of property. They've got big properties, they've got medium properties, they've got bunches of them. And there's a lot of insight we can glean from those folks who have worked on lots of different places and have a large scale of property they can work with. Like, certainly, I love talking to those people, and I know you talk to people like that too. But a lot of us listening, me included, we don't have that big property. We've got 40 acres or 80 acres or 20 acres, and we're sitting here thinking, man, is any of this relevant to me? Can I do anything on my little piece? So that's a question like I'm asking myself that all the time. And you, with a 15-acre piece that you're working on and a 70-acre piece, like you're living the realistic dream for most of us. You're living the thing that does seem possible for me, that does seem possible for a lot of folks. So I guess that is all to say, out the gate, Jared, you maybe I should just ask you, what was that process like in a Cliff Notesy kind of version to finally take the leap to start out with a small property, and now a handful of years into it, has it been worthwhile finally taking that leap into buying a piece, starting small? Has the the return on your investment from a satisfaction and joy and even hunting perspective been what you thought it would be?
Oh my gosh, overwhelmingly yes. Like you, I'm super obsessed with whitetails and bow hunting and gun hunting, all of the above. Michigan, we have a long-lasting tradition on deer camps and just been enamored by it my entire life. And, that first step in buying a property is definitely scary, financially, for your family. But once you make that first step and you realize that, you can make some sacrifices elsewhere to make things affordable, it's totally worth doing. My first property is 15 acres. I still own it. I've owned it for this month. It'll be 6 years. Bought it when I was 29, and it was the first one. You don't really know what you're getting into. You really don't. But there's only one way to learn, and that sink or swim type, whatever cliche you want to use. So I jumped in, and right off the bat, started with what knowledge I had in my head or what I had read on the internet or watched on YouTube, and started going after it. I screwed up many times between now and then and made some backwards moves. But that first 15 acres, I will remember that property for the rest of my life because it was so many firsts for me, so many feelings. My kids are little, planting apple trees with them, but also it's like a testing ground for everything that I do, that I talk about, that we recommend. Everything I've put in a small scale, I've tried it for the most part, and really, it's the juice is worth the squeeze overwhelmingly for that investment, and I'm net positive on equity at this time with it too. So, I don't see how you could really lose. Learning, the family experiences, the hunting, which has been great, and then an asset that's has equity. So yeah, I'm in.
So do you imagine, or was the plan with that small piece, was the plan to that this is going to be like a forever 15, or was the plan to buy it, build it, flip it for something bigger in the future? What's the game plan now on that front?
Yeah, so initially it was just get my own piece of land. I grew up hunting state land in West Michigan, Manistee National Forest my entire life. Shot my first buck out there, everything. So nobody in my family owned property, and it was just tough hunting. I mean, you've been over there. And so I've always wanted something better. And my buddy, he had 80 acres. His uncle had 80 acres growing up, and he was shooting 8 points and 10 points. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to buy a piece. So my whole life has just been sitting like that. And my thought is, I talked to Dan Perez a long time ago, and you hear his story, and he, goes smaller, bigger. And that's what I'm trying to do. But at the same time, if a piece is producing and it's affordable, I don't see the reason in selling it. At least that was my thought at the time. So the 15 has done well for hunting. But now I've kind of come to the part where, man, I wish I would have a little more income on it to help justify some things. And I kind of want to get that bigger piece, that next step finally. It took me a while to get to that step. My goal was every 5 years, address the situation and make a decision. So I'm on year 6. I didn't hit my goal on making a decision, or maybe I did internally because it hasn't sold. I haven't sold it. So kind of all up in the air there, but I would love something bigger. There's no question about that.
Interesting. But the 15 was still, it seemed, I mean, you just said, definitely worth it as a starting point. And it's, like you said, it's producing. So you are having success and you're having fun on a 15-acre property. It's possible to do it on 15 acres. Is it an unequivocal yes to that?
Yep, 110%.
So I want to get to how you got there. But at first, you said something that I have to dig into more first, which is you made a lot of mistakes. What were these mistakes that you made along the way over these 6 years with this first property, your first 15? What are the things you did that took steps backward?
Well, the first mistake I did was I went out there, and first day we were there, I rented a skid steer from a friend of mine, and we bulldozed or bush hogged, I should say, a lot of cover, a lot of area to make food plots. Food plot are the big things that everybody talks about, and they're important. But in Michigan, cover to me is king. And I spent the next 3 years building that cover back to try to reverse what I had done. And the reason that that's important is because our deer, as you know, are wired a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was one big mistake.
What percentage of that 15 would you say, what was the breakdown of the 15 acres when you started, and then after you went and knocked down all that cover, as far as like what was cover, what was open space? Before you crushed everything or brush hogged everything, and then afterwards?
Great question. So to give you a little bit of a layout, it's kind of split in two pieces. It's a big L shape. The back part of the parcel is lower wetland, a lot of bur oak back there, and then after me, behind me, it's a big swamp. Very helpful to have one of those nearby.
Yeah.
So the first, or I guess the back half of the property is wet lowland, kind of mature canopy forest with trees that like wet feet or roots in the water, which are the bur oak I have. Then up from there, there's about 5 acres of some higher ground with a ditch running through the middle. And that's where I did a lot of brush hogging. I bet I brush hogged probably 2.5 to 3 acres worth of area right off the bat. The wide, expansive food plot. I was satisfied. We were all high-fiving. It looked great. And I still killed a nice buck that year, but I realized that in Michigan or certain states like Michigan, we have to address this a little bit differently. So now, fast forward to 2022, fall of 2022, I bet I'm down to an acre total, acre and a half total, so cut in half about, really.
Of opening.
Of opening, that's for food. Yep, exactly. Everything else I've let grow in, thicken up between, my access location and the food plot is all now cover.
Interesting. So can you walk me through, since that initial opening up of stuff, what are some of those other best projects that you've done? What have been the most positively impactful things? Sure.
Proper access is always number one. You've talked about that 100 times. So have we. I can't push that enough. I don't step off of my access trail with my boots 2 yards to go into the property unless I'm, tracking a deer or whatever. I hold very true to that access. I planted some mass trees, some chestnuts and some apples, but those just started producing last year, so I really don't have a good beat on what that's done, if anything, for me yet. Screening, it kind of goes with the access, but screening your plots so they're not as big and wide open, or having cover around your plots so the deer can't walk out, which happened to me 2 years ago. He walked out, nice buck, looks across, didn't see any deer, turn around and walk back in the woods.
Yeah.
I killed him about an hour later, but but he did what, and it was my smaller food plot, but he still did that check that they do on large fields. They stand in the brush, they look out there in these large plots, they don't see anything, they don't smell anything, and they bugger out before you even know they're there most of the time. So cover around the food plots or screening. I always have a screen, whether it's switchgrass or an annual screen, sorghum, Egyptian wheat, that sort of thing. And then high quality food. Food is very, very important. I feel like it's one of the most important things, but it has to be surrounded by the right type of cover, in my opinion, in Michigan, to get a nice buck to use it in legal hours, right? So I've always had food plots since day one. They've always done pretty well. I take like a no-till approach, or I leave clover just in case something goes drought. I have a clover backup established. So between those three, I would say the access, the seclusion of the plots with screening products, giving the deer their low pressure, and then some high quality food That's pretty much what I've done since then.
Okay. So let's dig into the access side a little bit, because
Sure.
like you talked about, especially in a heavily pressured state like Michigan, and even more on a small property in a state like Michigan, the pressure is king. Like that's the thing that's going to influence deer movement almost more than anything. You can really, really easily booger that area up, I would imagine. So how did you go about creating or designing an access plan or actual paths, around this place so that you could hunt it sometimes, but not educate everything? Like, was it, I guess I'm curious to hear, like, how did access work? Where did you put these trails? How did you have a timing to when, like, hey, I'm never going to hunt the back of the farm until X time period? I'm curious about kind of that whole swath of things.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. The first access that we made with that brush hog day one was on the very southern line of the property. I'm figuring, after listening to all your stuff and hunting cold fronts, that's what I wanted to do. So I'd go down. My main day to hunt would be expectedly a north wind, something with a north to it. So access would be on the south side of the property, right on the fence line. That way I can keep an eye on my neighbors too, and et cetera, and vice versa. But so I have one main access on the south line. Now, we recommend to a lot of our folks that we help out to have access around your whole property if you can. If you can take a skid steer and make a road or a lane around your entire 40-acre square, that's going to behoove you in one way or another on certain winds. As long as you can get around, you can hunt most days, most winds. Not saying you should, but you can. And so that's what the goal is. My place, the north border of the property, butts up to my neighbor's field, which is overgrown, kind of autumn olive thicket. The deer really like that. And so after a year of hunting from the south side, I could see that I'm not going to bulldoze a path right through the middle of that. There's no way. So I don't hunt on a lot of south winds on that property. So you got this investment that I put all this money into and time, and I have to hunt on a certain wind, which to most guys sounds pretty crazy, but to some guys sounds kind of normal. I could never get myself to cut through that north side to hunt any south winds, and that burned me this year in 2022. We had a lot of south, we had a lot of east.
Yeah.
And I got burned on it. Now, I did get access from that one neighbor over there to the north. His dogs I've caught in trail cam running my deer around during November. His cows have been over. But he lets me walk in from that side. So it's one of those give and take things that it's like, man, how hard do you push this guy to fix his fence? And when he's letting you do that. So I do have a way to walk in. Unfortunately, that's been kind of grown up too. So now it's more, like you mentioned, I keep those north side spots for November 3rd, November 5th, November 1st, whatever. If I have a south wind that I need to get in there, I will burn some area by walking on it. That's all it takes, right? Walking through an area for that hunt, expecting to kill on that hunt. And if I don't, that sucks. I burned it for probably a few days and maybe longer than that. So to wrap it up, my main access is always on the south. Try to hunt the north and the west winds. But if there is something on the south and I have to get in there, I'll try to get access from a neighbor, or I will slide in there, try to make sure I'm scent free. Boots are treated with zeolite, everything, and just hope that I get him killed before he knows I'm there.
So I guess tagging on to that whole general idea, how often can you get away hunting this 15-acre piece in a given season without, negatively impacting it so much that you're hurting yourself? I'm sure you've been trying to test that out for yourself. You've been trying to figure that out over the years, I imagine. What have you learned? Is this like you get 3-4 hunts a year, or do you get 15, 20 hunts? What's it been in your experience?
Yeah, I bet you could do between 10 and 15, and I have, and be successful. I have 3 kids under 9 years old and everything else. So I don't get out and hunt as much as I wish I could. But I hunted it with my 4-year-old a few times this year, and we were successful. I bet I hunted it 7-8 times. It's an hour and 15 minutes away too, so that weighs in. But it's if you do it right and your access is bulletproof, you can hunt it 20 times. You just really have to pay attention, and it depends how your property sets up. Do you have the cover where they feel safe? Do you have the food? Is your wind not blowing in there ever? If you're diligent and detailed about it, the more you can hunt, in my opinion.
Yeah. So what else is important to do? Like, what other projects have you done on the property that are particularly important because of this small scale to allow you to keep hunting? Like, you talked about some of the stuff you did to try to add cover back. I imagine that was part of it. What kind of things like that are you doing to make sure that this place can handle some hunting and still hold deer and still make deer feel safe, even though it's a small size of ground we're talking?
Yeah, number one would be, do not let your wind blow into that parcel. 0. I know sometimes you have to give the wind to a big buck, and I've done that, and I get that. But if you want to hunt it more than less, don't let your wind blow into the parcel really ever, if you can help it. I know nothing's perfect. Don't walk into the parcel. I use a lot of cellular cameras. I know there's some morality conversations going on with those lately, and I get it. My point is, I don't want to walk 50, 60, 75 yards out into my property and leave my scent. Yeah. That's a no-no, no matter what. And then I guess some tools of the trade that I love to use would be mock scrapes. Those have become popular the last 5 years or so. I've been using those religiously forever. And I don't go make like 50 of them, but I'll make a dozen or so and really put a dripper on it and a camera on it and let them tell me the story.
In those scrapes, is the benefit of them is just to get the photos, or are you adding those scrapes because you think that's making more bucks want to hang out in season, checking those, and they're spending more time in daylight hitting those and that kind of thing?
I think the latter. Oh, both, really. Hi, buddy. I'm on the phone. I think the mock scrapes will tell you a picture, or paint the picture for you when daylight is there. Daylight movement. So I use them for that on when I should hunt. But more importantly, the social aspect. Get these bucks feeling like, all right, well, here's my night tonight. I'm going to travel here and hit these 4. I'm going to scent check this bedding area and repeat the next day or the day after, right? So I'm more intrigued and relying on the social aspect of it. And I think a lot of small property owners need to be doing that at every tree stand location. I have one at every stand location.
What's your mock scrape kind of process? There's a lot of different approaches to it. Some people just use what's out there. Some people will bring in a rope or a different stick from somewhere else or anything like that. What's your style?
Sure. Yeah, you can use a vine or whatever else, right? There's a lot of different stuff out there. I like to take a white oak branch and cut it while it's green and hang that dangling down with some zip ties or paracord. That is my licking branch, and it hangs down, pretty far, and a lot of leaves on it. My thought is, the more matter up there to catch scent and hold scent, the better off it'll be. And maybe it's overkill, but that's what I do. And they love, walk down a field edge and look for the oaks that have overhanging branches. They're all hit. So why go crazy and add something foreign? Let's use what Mother Nature's already using. So that's what I do for my licking branch. I will hit the ground with a rake. I've used herbicide to clear that ground. I make that ground extremely obvious. Like, I'll do a 5 or 6 foot circle. And again, could be overkill, but to me, you're opening up that much more ground scent, the smell of dirt, etc. It's visual now at this point. And then I like to use, in combination with all that, you can just do that and let the deer take over. But I like to start out with some synthetics to start, and I don't go back and touch it ever. I don't go back and refill. I don't do anything. I set it and forget it, really, and then monitor from afar with cameras or from tree stands, etc.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
All right, so I feel like I'm accruing a set of small property rules here, or guidelines. When you're hunting it, make sure you have that, or make sure from the get-go you establish this bomb access. Like, make sure you've got very smart access plans, and then create the routes, cut them, brush hog them, whatever, so you have a quiet, easy access route in from a safe wind perspective. Never blow your wind into the core of your property. Hunt it carefully and sparingly, only when those things are right. Establish mock scrapes throughout to have those social hotspots. Let's talk about cover, because you mentioned that one of your big mistakes is removing too much cover. So you started with 15 acres, you took out 3 acres of it. So you're left with 12 acres of some kind of cover, 3 acres open. Now you've added 1.5 acres or more back to that. And I think I've heard you talk about other things you've done to improve the cover that you did have. Can you talk about how you've created cover from nothing and how also you've improved the cover that you already had? Are you one of those guys who, follows the, like the Jake Elinger approach or Jim Browker with like hinge cutting like crazy and just like tons and tons of these hell holes? Or are you taking a more broad strokes TSI approach to everything? Like, what's, you've been able to talk to all these different people. What have you chosen to do on your own, 12, 13 acres of cover working there?
Yeah, great question. With multiple answers, I'd say. The back 8-acre woods, I called it. I had that, it was logged probably 2 years before I bought it. And I had it logged again, like 3 years later. And so the loggers were all like, okay, your trees aren't quite big enough to cut yet. If you just wait, you'll have more value in these trees later on. That wasn't really my goal. My goal was to create better deer habitat now, and how much money you're really going to make off of 8 acres of sparing oaks.
Yeah.
A lot more than I did probably, but so I had that cut as soon as I could get back in there and learned and realized what I was missing. I had that cut, and that probably happened in 2019 or 2020. That's grown up to be nice and thick. So that was my TSI approach. That was letting the sunlight come in.
So full 8 acres, kind of select logging. It sounds like across the board, making an 8-acre solid timber with better understory. Is that accurate?
Yes. If you've ever seen a picture of an oak savanna, or if somebody Googles oak savanna, it's like sparing oaks, randomly, or spaced out, if you will, planted pretty far apart so they can do well, and then the rest of the ground gets hit with sunlight everywhere else. And nothing above 5 foot is really beneficial to a deer unless it's dropping acorns. So I really was trying to put the 95% of what's left back into that 5 foot or under range. So that's what we did there. We cut it hard. I didn't make very much money, but I also didn't have to do it and put my safety at risk, time.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of won, and the deer won too. Now, that being a little bit of a lower land back there, a little bit of wetland, it's taking longer to regenerate than I'd like, but it's regenerating, and the deer are responding to it. And then moving up to the front half of the property, if you will, I've done it all. I've hinge cut a bunch. I believe in hinge cutting. I've seen it. I've been on Jake's farm. I've been on my friend Alan's farm. I've been on these farms where these guys cut hard. And when I'm talking cut hard, they cut hard.
Like tornado. It looks like a tornado came through.
Yeah, there's nothing left standing, really. Like, there's nothing left. And unless you see that firsthand, you don't understand how hard you need to cut, including me. I didn't know. But where I think hinge cutting is extremely beneficial, especially in the Midwest and the North. It's a tool in your tool belt. People think because I'm pro hinge cutting and I made a bumper sticker one time, like a pro hinge cut bumper sticker. It's pretty funny, kind of as a joke, but it's just a tool in our tool belt. We don't recommend you go in and hinge cut your 40-acre woods. I don't do that. It's very situational. After 6 years of doing this on the property, my recommendation is to get a forester in there first, explain your goals. What are your goals? You want to grow timber? You want to grow deer? A little bit of both. A lot of our clients want a little bit of both. And how do you address that? The more you go for timber, the less it's going to be beneficial for deer or wildlife in general. So now I TSI first with a forester, select cut. I tend to go heavy if I can, and then come in with the hinge cutting architecture or just felling more junk trees. Either way, get them on the ground, get the sunlight to the forest floor. That's rule number one. I hinge cut along my access where I park my truck. You can't walk from the woods to my truck in that certain area because of like the tornado zone I created, but that hides me. It allows me to park and get in there. I've hinge cut some bedding areas on the 15, and the deer are bedding in them. So I'm kind of a all around guy at this point when it comes to which type of timber tool you want to use.
And you also, I think I've heard you talk about doing some grass stuff, right? Have you done some switchgrass out there somewhere too?
Oh, yes. You mentioned that as part of the question. Yes. I've planted some cave and rock switchgrass in 3 different spots. One of them was to hide my access walking in. I frost seeded that. That looks pretty good. I don't own a no-till drill or I have an HEV and some tools, and I'll have a tractor here finally soon, but I don't own the no-till, so I broadcast and frost seed. And that was for access. That's working great. Now I'm hiding one of my tower blinds with some nice switch. That's coming in. But the main thing that I did was out in the middle of the food plots where I talked about replacing that cover that I brush hogged down.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I've practiced with an annual screen for 2 or 3 years and knowing I can divert the deer enough to come by my tree stand location at 23 yards, now I've replaced that annual screen with a perennial screen being switchgrass. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking that task of having to get out there and plant every late May, early June, and hoping my screen comes into something that's established. That's kind of a cool project where I'm using it more for diverting than bedding on this 15. They kind of already bed where they bed. It's hard to force them to bed in new spots with switchgrass if you're not dealing with like a big open field or something like that.
Yeah. So what's the no-till approach that you took with that switch? How did you apply herbicide the fall before or something and then frost seed, or how did you handle that competition?
Yep, you nailed it. I sacrificed the fall before by having this big dead brown spot out in front of me.
And was that and sorry to interrupt, but like when exactly did you spray? Was that like a Roundup spray in August preseason, or did you actually have to apply it like in hunting season? And did that freak you out?
I did both. I did 2 sprays to make sure it was good and dead. And yeah, it always freaks me out. I'm pretty anal about it, and it didn't hurt anything. I don't think, if you stay on your equipment and you're quick about it. But I don't want to be in there if I don't have to be during those times. So yeah, I sprayed with herbicide twice, got it very nice and dead, and frost seeded it. And then the next year, I hit it with simazine early on, which is a pre-emergent, helps keep anything else from coming up and establishing before your switch germinates and comes up. And then I mowed once it hits that second. So switchgrass will split when it's growing. Once it hits that second split, or that second or third leaf, if you want to call it that, or blade, then I'll mow it, and that tends to take out a lot of the weedy growth, broadleaf competition in there. Now, I mean, it's looking good. I'm impressed. You just have, with switchgrass, you just have to give it time. And I know everybody's impatient, at least I am, and you want things to be done now and yesterday. But with switchgrass, don't give up on it. Keep at it, and you'll reap the rewards there.
Yeah. So year one, what kind of growth was there?
Probably like 3 foot.
Okay. And then by year two, was it 5, 6, something like that? Or
yeah, it was 5. Last year was year 2. It was 5. So I'm pretty excited to see what it'll be this year. Yeah, I'm hoping that what it'll do. I mean, they're still going to travel through it, but if I can give them a path of least resistance that goes around it, a nice big mock scrape there, right at the tip of this funnel. And oh, by the way, my tree stands, like I said, just within bow range of there. I'm hoping that'll pull them up, and it's worked in the past. So that's kind of my thought process there.
Yeah, that sounds pretty nice. So speaking of screening cover then, and that kind of thing, what are the other screening techniques or, blocking techniques that you've used outside just switch? Because you mentioned switch is like the long term, excuse me, but you've used some annuals to get you by in the past. Otherwise, is that Egyptian wheat or sorghum? What are you doing?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of companies, everybody can find their favorite food plot company and find a screening mix. Usually, that's what I was using with a local one here in Michigan. And that was a mix of sorghum, Egyptian wheat, some other stuff in there. I should probably know more on what was really in there, but I didn't really look. I planted it, and it worked great. But the main stuff was sorghum and Egyptian wheat. And so what that would do, that'd be 12, 13 foot high. Each year I'd plant it about 6 to 8 foot wide. And that would be more of a screen for the deer to kind of funnel them. Now, if I'm screening myself, at least on this property, you can use those same types of screens. My friend in Illinois, he plants the same stuff, and we walk behind it to hunt on his wide open terrain. But what I did on the 15, since I didn't really have a bunch of wide open fields, I had more trees. I would end up hinge cutting along there and felling trees along there, letting that sunlight come in and just thicken it right the heck up with briars and early successional growth, and that works as a great screen too. So I've kind of done both of those. I've also planted miscanthus. That's a touchy subject depending on who you're talking about or talking to. Gigantus miscanthus is a rhizome-based plant that you can plant in the ground one time, and that grows after 2-3 years, 6 to 12, 15 foot tall, and kind of that's what I'm looking for here. It kind of propagates itself underground and starts to spread and fill in a little bit. But that's a great screen. It's a little more of an initial investment, and some folks are claiming that there's a invasive risk to it, and that's above my pay grade. But I've used it, and it's effective. It's just another way to do it. Hybrid willows would be a fourth way. Hybrid or streamco willows. You get those in cuttings or propagate yourself in the basement over the wintertime when you're bored, and you can plant those in some wet feet areas. Those can become a nice wall cover. deer like to rub on them and bust them off. And so there are multiple ways you can do it. And I've done all those.
Okay, so let me paint a picture of a scenario I'm faced with. I've used Egyptian wheat in the past, and it works awesome. And it has screened some plots that I have. One in particular that's within view of the road and adjacent to a big open field. And so screening was really important. The thing with that is that, as I understood it, it's important to plant it when it's warm enough. So I'd always been told you got to wait till like late May, early June-ish, somewhere in that ballpark to plant it. Otherwise, you can't do it. And so I did that, but then starting, I don't know, some number of years ago, I started living, and I've got a weird situation, but I go out west for the summer. And so I'm not home in late May, early June anymore to plant this stuff. So now I'm trying to figure out, is there any other screen I can get out there that I could be planting at the end of April or otherwise to somehow get some kind of screening cover out there in these places, without having to wait till the middle of the summer when I'm gone. And I've thought about miscanthus, but I don't know I haven't looked far enough into it to know if that's something you can plant early in the year or not, or if I could plant it late in the summer, and plan on it coming in the next spring and actually growing. Would miscanthus work given that limitation I have with time, or is planting switch really the only way I could get away with something that's always going to be there and doesn't require me planting in June? Or am I an idiot and I could be planting Egyptian wheat April 29th or 30th and get away with it? Do you know?
That's a great question. I know you want to wait till the soil temperatures up in that, high 50s, 60-degree mark for that annual Egyptian wheat type stuff, or in that general time frame. Miscanthus, I normally plant around that same time. I'd have to double check what the exact date is. I don't know why you couldn't plant it earlier, or even, in the fall or another time possibly. But how long are you going to be at this certain area for? Is this a long-term gig?
You mean like when I'm gone for the summer, or like the property that I'm hunting? Like how long do I plan on continuing to hunt there?
The latter.
I hope for a long time.
Well, then I'd probably go with a combination of like switchgrass and Norway spruce. So those spruce over time will grow up, over more time than we want to wait. Again, I know, but that will be a great screen along roads that you plant once.
Yeah.
Now, hybrid willow, there's a guy that I know in southern Michigan. He has a really nice hybrid willow screen along his road, and I planted 4 or 5 of them behind my house to block my neighbor's house 4 or 5 years ago. They're 30 foot tall, and you can coppice them and cut them off at the 3 foot mark, and they'll just bush out and be a very nice screen. Now they lose their leaves in the fall, so there's that. So if you do a combination of something that's more permanent, more perennial, that's going to solve your issue of, hey, I'm not around at this certain time of year. Plus, those annual screens suck up so much nitrogen out of the soil every year that eventually, if you're not replacing that nitrogen, you're going to be, you're going to have lower and lower returns on your planting.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. What's the process with those hybrid willows, and how quickly do those establish? I've never messed with willows at all. Is that literally like a stake that you're just sticking in the ground and then it just starts going? Is that what I'm thinking of, or something different?
No, that's right. I've learned, though, that if you're in a wetter area, which I'm not sure which spot you're talking about, but I know you have a certain wet area.
Yeah, this is the wet spot. This is the wet spot, yeah.
Okay, well, then they're going to do great there. I've tubed them so the deer don't bite them off as they're trying to get established. And, yeah, they're the stakes or the cuttings. You can come to my house, or I'll bring you some. Just cut them. You cut them in make sure the direction's right. You know where the top and the bottom are, but you take a big branch and cut it into 5 stakes, and you can put them in a jar of water with some rooting hormone first, or you just stick them in the wet ground. I've done both. And yeah, if you can get them potted first, anything that you can get potted, from my experience, whether it's a bare root tree, pine tree versus a potted pine tree, or a willow that I can get going in a pot first, you're going to have a better success rate. but it's more time up front. So there's really a bunch of different ways you can do it. But those things in the wet should be pretty prolific in a short amount of time.
So how, to visually provide some kind of visual barrier, up to, let's say 5 feet tall, give or take, is that a 2-year thing maybe? Or what's the timeline to get that kind of growth out of something like that?
Yeah, those will get 5 foot in 1 to 2 years. Yep.
Nice. Interesting. Yep. We should definitely talk about that, because that might be, I don't need a very long row of that kind of thing. I just kind of need one, like, I don't know, even like 40 yards of it would give me the main area blocked that I want. Something like that might be the trick. So yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, especially if we can go add some depth to it, right? Like if you think about one line of pine trees, yeah, it's a pretty good screen. You can kind of see through it here and there. If you have 4 rows, it's a totally different conversation. So same thing with this area. If we have some more freedom to go more in depth, more deeper versus length, that's going to behoove you even more.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that. Okay, so screening, I think, is another key thing that could really help you on a small property like we're talking about, because it's going to provide that visual cover from neighbors or roads, but also your access. So that's a big thing on our set of small property foundational ideas here. We talked about your cover ideas, doing the hinging, doing some serious cutting, bringing in a forester, figuring all that kind of stuff out. We haven't really talked about food, but people love talking about food, and it's hard not to get excited about it. In your experience on a small property, this 15 or maybe on the projects you've worked with, consulting for people, or on your 70-acre piece, how much food, and I know that this is situation and location dependent, but if you had to give me a ballpark idea, how much food do you need to make a difference? To get started and be like, okay, this is enough to actually change your property in a positive way. Do we need an acre or two, or is an eighth of an acre or half an acre still enough in your mind to start moving things in the right direction? I guess I'm thinking here from a starting point. What's our minimum viable product?
So how about the infamous answer of it depends?
Yeah.
That doesn't get anybody anywhere, but it really does. But if I had to generalize, do what you can do. Get started. I mean, if you can do an eighth of an acre, a quarter acre, and it's in the right location, you mentioned with the screening, quick before we switch gears, keep people from driving down the road, looking into your farm. Make sure they cannot do that. That's very important. Or your deer will not come out in the daylight, at least the ones that we're targeting. So for food, it has to be in the right location. Can people see it from the road? That's a huge no-no. So where do you have the room to do it? How much space, is your property allowing you to get started? Make sure you can access it. If you can't get to it, or you have to walk through your food plot to hunt the tree stand behind it, start over, or don't plant a food plot there. All things that we see and that folks do, because it's easier to do it where there might be a preferred opening. But in general, if you can get, again, and deer population comes into this too, deer density, but if you can get a quarter acre started or an eighth of an acre started, do it. Start there. The cliche thing is what, 10% of a property in food plots. I've heard a lot of people say that's great. I haven't reached that level yet. Too much. Maybe I'm close, but I don't have wide open fields that allow me to do it in large numbers. So I would just urge you to try it and get started, and make sure you're growing good quality stuff, because then you're going to see the biggest bang for your buck and your time spent.
Yeah. So what's your take then these days on what that high quality stuff is? I mean, you've heard 1,000 different takes from people on what you should plant in your food plots. You've experimented with a bunch of different things. We've all heard you got to buy this thing, or you got to buy this thing, or you need to plant this, you need to plant that. There's there's more opinions on food plots than there are stars in the sky. But where have you landed as far as your philosophy on how you choose what you want to plant? Can you give me some background into your thinking there, like how you got to this point, and then what you personally choose to put out there in the world, both for people to use themselves and to plant yourself?
Yeah, and thank you for allowing me to go into the backstory, because I'll kind of explain how I got here. I was just going to ask you that. It first started with getting a disc and working up the dirt and spreading out, buck on the bag style food plot mix from company A, B, or C. We all have them. Every local store has something. That's where I started, and it worked good. Initially, the soil had not been planted before. It was a cattle pasture. Many years before that, there were some nutrients in the ground. Well, in Michigan, we have pretty sandy soil that drains out nutrients quickly, gets depleted quickly, and it's not that Iowa-rich black dirt. Some parts we have it, but not for the majority, no. So I started that way, and again, time and efficiency is always important to me. I always try to be most efficient, spending most time with my family as I can while they're young and everything else. So I'm always trying to get stuff done with one fell swoop, or one afternoon instead of 4. So back with the disking, I'd have to go out there and have to spray 2 weeks ahead of time, go out there and spray again. Then you come back and disc it, plant it, and then you hope for rain. Your soil's exposed. I've had, I think, 2 or 3 drought years, at least 2 drought years in the past 5 seasons that I've been through. Well, I interviewed some people way back when on the podcast that you could plant food plots without working the ground up at all. Spray and pray, throw and mow, whatever you want to call it. You'd spray with herbicide, you'd plant small seeds, brassicas, clovers, etc., prior to a rain. And you let that rain drive the seeds down into the soil, and that dead thatch layer acts as, you planting the seed or burying the seed. Once I saw that starting to work, I stopped using a disc. I could do all of it in one day. I could spray and broadcast my seed and drive home. I started doing that about 4 years ago. And, it's not quote unquote like perfect no-till, but it's kind of my hillbilly no-till, and it works great. You have to up your seed rate a little bit and etc. But the principles are there, right? The soil health principles are there of minimal ground disturbance. I haven't disked my food plots in 4 years. So you're helping build some of that organic matter and nutrients back into that very sandy soil I mentioned. And my time was cut in half. My trips were cut in half. Gas money cut in half, if not into thirds. So it was making sense to me, right? And the deer are still there. And so I did that for up until last year with the same sort of mixes that you can buy at the big box stores or local sporting goods stores. And then, what helped solidify me in this no-till disturbance, your podcast you did with Dr. Grant Woods, I think it was 279. You did a few of them with him, but
yeah.
When I heard that one, he made it so simple, stupid to me that I was like, what am I doing? And ever since then, I've listened to that podcast 2 or 3 times. And I follow all his stuff anyways, but ever since then, he just made it seem so just easy to do and the right thing to do. So that was kind of the first toe in the water towards diversity and no-till planting for me. And then I did kind of like I said, the hillbilly no-till for a while. And then a good friend of mine, longtime listener of our podcast, he's been on a bunch of times. We call him the soil guy because he's like Mark Drury is mad scientist when it comes to deer hunting. He's like that about soil health. And I'm not. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not near as well versed in it as Al is. So he's been planting some mixes, some very diverse mixes. 10 seeds in a mix, 12 seeds, 16 way mixes, the past 5-6 years, just like Grant talks about, and etc. To try to get that diversity back into the food plot program. Still no-till, and just kind of simplified. He was making his own mixes, having a lot of luck in Southern Ohio, and he's been a friend of mine for years now. Well, we went to the table, and my good buddy who I was working with food plots on our podcast for a long time passed away from COVID. So we were kind of at a loss, and they didn't want to keep moving with that company in terms of a partnership with our podcast, et cetera. So it kind of came down to, what are we going to do here? We love to plant plots, so we decided to come together and come up with some simple mixes for folks like me who just want to be quick, be effective, be efficient at a good cost, and get it done. So that's where Vitalized Seed was born, and that's where I'm at now. These mixes are extremely diverse. Let's see, I think the spring mix is 13 different plant types, and the fall mix is 16 different plant types. So that just kind of took my no-till story, the spray and pray, into even the next level. Well, now you're doing this with clovers, cereal grains, and brassicas all mixed together. And that's all been kind of my story for the past 6 years of where I started and where I'm at now being fully diverse plant mixes, one in the spring, one in the fall, highly attractive and diverse to whitetails, and all promoting soil health, nutrient cycling, less fertilizer, less herbicide.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you stop the tilling. So now you're not disturbing the soil. You're not, losing moisture from your soil. You're not encouraging further erosion of the soil. You're not destroying the biological life that's within that soil. And instead, you're building organic material on top that is then, becoming part of that soil. You've better water filtration now. You have new and encouraged additional growth of biology and all those little microbes within the soil that give that soil the power and the punch it needs to grow stuff. So that all makes a lot of sense. You then move to this diverse planting. Now, can you describe for me a little bit more why diversity is a good thing for our food plots and for getting stuff there on the ground? Because there's a lot of talk about this. There's some people who say, man, you shouldn't plant blends because you're never going to do it at the right time for any one of those things, or you're not going to get any one of these plantings quite right. But then there's this whole other suite of reasons why the blends are a good idea. What's your take on that? What makes diversity a good thing when it comes to food plots, and how does it help both from a hunting standpoint and from a soil health or food quality standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you really know your stuff. Are you available for hire?
Yeah.
Because, you just hit all the nails on the head, and I'm just going to agree with what you're saying. Honestly, I mean, for those who say you can't plant mixes together, a diverse mix together, I would disagree because I've done it and seen it. I get their point where maybe, okay, you're not hitting the 110% most optimal time for this seed. Or this seed, but like my goals, I'm trying to be efficient and simple and as effective as I can. So we've planted these highly diverse mixes, and they work, and all the seeds grow, and it's not quite as big of a red alarm as some people say. The reason for doing that, though, why we like it, so in the spring, we call it the nitro boost mix. It's a play on nitrogen, right? So the atmosphere is like almost 80% nitrogen in the air that we breathe. Our lungs are able to filter the O2, the oxygen out of that, and et cetera. But air is the majority percent nitrogen. Well, a lot of the plants in our spring mix, legumes, can take that nitrogen from the air, push it through their system into the roots, and have root exudation. We have a picture of a sun hemp plant that literally pulled it out of the ground, and you look, and there's little white balls on the roots that look just like the 4600 nitrogen pellets you buy at Tractor Supply. So, I mean, we're seeing it happen. And the other reason for the diversity is because, well, now you have sun hemp roots that might go down 6 inches. You have sunflower roots that go down further. You have certain clovers that are shallower. What we're doing is we're taking nutrients from the top 2, 3, 4 foot of the soil column, and that plant is pulling them all together into one plant. And when you terminate that spring mix, all those nutrients are right there on top of the soil, not 4 foot down, not in the air above you. They're right there, ready to be used. That's why we do diversity in our mixes in the spring mix. So what the spring mix does is it cycles all the nutrients, heavy on putting nitrogen into the ground, which is free fertilizer, from all these different levels. And when you terminate it for the fall planting, it's all readily available right there over time. I mean, like, it doesn't break down overnight and you can't use it exactly the next day, but our system is more of a year after year, it gets better and better. Now in the fall, the carbon load play on carbon. That's what plants feed on, right? The sugars, the carbohydrates. So the nitro boost, the nitrogen is feeding the fall plant that you planted and helping that grow for free. And then in turn, that big diversity of clovers, brassicas, cereal grains in the fall 16-way mix is doing the same thing. You're grabbing nutrients from 3, 4 foot down. You're keeping all of this at the right level in the soil, the top 6 inches. And when spring comes along again and your fall plant has been terminated, it's all dead carbon laying there. It's like the corn. They disc the corn back into the ground. It's high in carbon. They disc it back in. It feeds the soil. That's what we're doing. We're doing no-till. All those that fall carbon mix plays right into what the spring nitro mix wants to feed off of again. So it's a cycle, and it's how Mother Nature does it, and it's diverse in the way that it grabs nutrients and cycles them throughout the year. Now, what that means for animals, they understand nutrient density. They'll walk through a soybean field, I've heard and seen some of where they'll pick certain leaves off certain plants. Maybe they'll walk by your food plot to eat the goldenrod that's on the side of your food plot. They can tell, they're selective browsers. They can tell what has the best nutrients and what tastes the best. A metaphor we always hear about is the fruit plantings. How oranges and apples and whatnot don't have the nutrients they used to. That you might still have a bigger, larger orange, but it doesn't contain the same amount of nutrients it did 20 years ago. That's nutrient density of the plant itself, and it tastes different. So deer know that, and they're getting more nutrients out of each plant. They're getting their minerals out of these plants. You can't put minerals out in Michigan anymore. So this is another way where we can help everything, really, and just find what works for you. Now, if some of those seeds and those diverse mixes don't come up right away, the temp, maybe you get a cold front or something happens, or a drought, some will pop up right away, and then some of the other ones might fill in later. Like some clovers don't establish as fast as, say, a sorghum or buckwheat, right? Buckwheat's an easy one to talk about. So, but what you have now in the column, you have food. Like in our fall mix, I think we have 3 different types of beans. We have eagle beans in there. Regular soybeans. We added American Joint Vetch and Lab for the boys down south. And what you have now is you have food from 4 foot in the air all the way down to the clovers and the vetch that's right in the bottom floor. Where a brassica or like a soybean field, once those leaves fall off, you have some beans in there, or corn, for instance, you have a cob of corn, but we're filling in that gap with all food. The sunlight is penetrating through all of that, and now we have a more mass of plant matter with every square foot.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, how different things will start growing at different speeds and different times. It made me think just how diversity, in addition to what you said, also provides a really nice insurance policy for bad conditions or for any number of things that can go wrong with a food plot. if you plant all one thing, if you plant a monoculture, it's either boom or bust, right? You either did it perfect with the perfect soil conditions for that plant type and the perfect, rain, timing and the perfect nitrogen content or whatever it is, pH level, yada, yada, yada. So you might nail it, or it might just be a complete failure. On the side of diversity, you can get away with things maybe not being just right for one of those because you've got 15 other things that, have a chance of succeeding. So you're going to have something work. Maybe 12 out of the 15 work great, and you get 3 that don't turn out as well in your conditions, but you've got something altogether there that's going to work and going to provide some level of benefit and attraction. And I love the idea of having something that is attractive throughout the entire season. I've done food plots in the past where I was doing monocultures, and it was like, all right, man, this food plot is going to be banging from opening day till the beginning of November, but then it's kind of slowing down, and by late season, it's toast. Like, it's just not going to be attractive because of what I chose to place there. And then I'd have another food plot that would be like my late season spot. But that there's, I guess there's reasons to do that maybe, but I have found better success now with these diverse blends that I've used the last, 3-4 years, because I get attraction from the very first day of the season to the very end of the season and beyond, because something within that blend is attractive. So I've got 3-4 things that are attractive early, 3-4 things in there that are attractive mid-season, 3-4 different things that are attractive at the end. And so deer now form this pattern and this behavior where they just know, hey, year round, I know there's something good there. So I'm going to have this back and forth thing that doesn't ever have to change. And that's very beneficial, obviously, then from a hunting standpoint. So you've got, the nutritional component and then the hunting patterning component, not to mention the soil health stuff, which, like you said, great podcast we did with Grant. I've read a lot on it. I tested some of those things first on the back 40, and now I've been doing it more and more on my other local pieces. And it makes a lot of sense to basically work with Mother Nature to enjoy the benefits of natural fertilizer and natural water conservation, all this kind of stuff, rather than pumping in chemical synthesized substitutes that cost a lot of money, especially these days. Man, I bought a little bit of fertilizer last year, and that stuff is expensive now. I mean,
oh, no kidding,
crazy how much it rose in cost. So, going this route, regardless of what blend you use, I think diverse and trying to apply these different no-till ideas just is it's better for the earth, it's better for the soil, it's better for the deer, it's better for your wallet. It's hard to argue with it from everything I've been seeing and learning. That I do have a question for you, rather than me ranting about why I like it.
No, you just wrapped that up very nicely and hit the spots that I missed. If there's one thing I can add quick, Mark, going back to the 6 soil health principles, you want to keep a living root in the ground at all times for the microbes in the soil. If your beans are done, there's nothing going on in that soil till you're planting next year. And deer know that, your soil knows that. So, the fact that it's not a monoculture, drought resistant, you get a warm day in December, that rye is going to start popping again. Or even January in certain, Southern Ohio, that rye and that wheat and the mix and whatever mix you use is going to start popping again. It's made to do that. So yeah, and I mean, pretty much whatever mix you use or mix your own, diversity is extremely helpful. We've gone through it with the seed mills where you walk in there and they look at you like you're crazy. You want to do what? You want to buy and mix all this? No, we don't have that. So then you got to buy 50 pounds of rye, 25 pounds and then you're starting to have all this extra seed lying around. We just pretty much tried to button all that up and simplify it.
Yeah. So the spring and fall plantings, or the spring and late summer plantings, how would you recommend someone go about doing that? As far as the best food or best, there's a number of different ways to do this kind of thing, right? You could use a drill, you can do the hillbilly approach you took, and then there's different ways to terminate. And I guess basically what I'm looking for here is, could you walk me through your recommended process for how you go about planting your spring planting, and then if you should terminate, how you terminate, and then how you go about it in the fall planting, how you recommend doing that. And yeah, I guess I'll let you run with that.
Yeah, great question. There's a multitude of ways you can do this depending on what equipment you have. I would urge people to start with a clean slate. Don't go out in your pasture and just start broadcasting onto a thatched layer of grass. You're not going to win. So I would recommend, or I start with an herbicide treatment and or even tillage for day one. Now, this is just to get a clean slate. I have no problem with that. We're just trying to minimize soil disturbance over time and herbicide use over time. Not saying we never use them, but if we can decrease that, the more the merrier. So a clean slate in the spring or the fall is how I like to start. So what then I would do, there's multiple ways you can plant. If you have a no-till drill, God bless you. I'm jealous. That's awesome. I hope to have one someday. That's going to be your probably number one way to get the best seed to soil contact. And we have like an average depth that we'll use for the mixes, so you're getting a little bit of everything. That's one way to do it. A friend of mine uses a 2-row corn planter, the kind that you run through disc to ground, and the old John Deere, Alice Chambers, you can use those. It might not be the most effective way, but I've seen it done and it does work. How I normally do it would be just a broadcast method. So I would spray the ground and or till it or disc it, get myself a fresh, clean start at the very beginning of my system I'm about to commit for the next 5 years. And I broadcast and I up the seed rate.
Sorry, what time of year is this, Jared, that you would start this spring planting?
Great question, Mark. We like to wait till the soil temps between 55 and 60. I'm a little bit more on the 57, 58 to 60 degree range. So depending on what that is, it could be May up here in our neck of the woods, late May, early June. But that's where we want it to be. I mean, there's soybeans, sunflowers, eagle beans, that sort of thing in these mixes. So we want to make sure that you're not putting it in the ground at the wrong time. So we're about that 60 degree temp mark.
Okay.
And then I broadcast, I add about 25% extra seed per acre than if I were to drill it. You could even go 50%. If you have a good price seed and you're not paying out the wazoo for it and you can afford to do a little more, it's not going to hurt you. I'd tend to do 25 to 50%, usually more on that 25 mark. So what I do is I'll broadcast that and I will cultipack it in. Now, if you're on year 2 or 3 of this system, you're going to have rye, etc., popping up from your fall plot from the season before. You are going to have that, shoots of growth in May from the fall plot. You're not going to have a clean slate. So what you do then is you broadcast or drill into that live standing vegetation, and you terminate that vegetation over top of the seed you just spread. Now, there are multiple ways to terminate. You can use a brush hog. You can use herbicide. You can use a roller crimper. You can use a lawnmower. One that's not talked about enough is a flail mower. It's an attachment for a tractor that's meant for more heavier duty brush than a brush hog. But if you notice behind a brush hog, sometimes you get like a windrow where the thatch kind of all piles up in the middle or off to one side.
Yeah.
The flail mower will cut it a lot more even, giving you more even coverage over the seeds you just threw down. So that's a tip there that a lot of people don't really talk about. So plant, terminate over top. Now, any more questions on the spring mix before we shift gears?
I do. One last question.
Yep, go ahead.
Just in case somebody is well, 2 things. I guess one, the big benefit to doing the spring planting, correct me if I'm wrong, but by doing the spring planting, you are essentially, this is a way to fertilize and prepare for your fall hunting plots, but you're doing it in a way that, isn't pumping synthetic fertilizers into the ground. It's not costing you as much from that perspective, and you're building the soil content. And as a bonus, you are now adding high quality food for all sorts of wildlife for an additional 3 months of the year, to then build into your fall hunting plot. Am I right on like a Cliff Notes version of the benefits of doing the spring planting? Is that right?
Yep, and I would go as far as say as you're also suppressing weeds.
Yeah.
At that time as well for all summer long, which again relates to lower herbicide use.
Okay, cool. So then second question would be, if we're trying to build a spring mix ourselves, if we're just trying to DIY it, what are the like just foundational like types of, give me a high level broad strokes idea of what kind of stuff I should try to include if I'm DIYing this myself?
Yeah, so what can be unique is trying to get the carbon to nitrogen ratios perfect between the spring and fall planting. That's what we tend to do. It's kind of our niche. But if you're going in there, a lot of guys will plant rye and buckwheat, sunflowers, some clovers, legumes, right? Any legume will put nitrogen into the ground. Beans will help prepare for the fall planting. There's a bunch of different soil building mixes, you could call them, out there. So just understand that spring food plots can be harder and more challenging than fall food plots based on what you're dealing with the summer. You may or may not get rain. Yeah. You might have some more weeds in there, warm season type plants, because you're not planting in the fall. And they do look a little messier sometimes. But just think of it this way. All that is going to go back into the soil to feed your next round. So I think the upside outweighs the downside.
Yep. Okay. I follow you there. So now we have this messy summer food plot, but it's great. It's providing all sorts of cool stuff. There's some weeds in there, but that's fine because weeds in many ways are good for all sorts of other critters and pollinators and fun stuff like that. Now we edge into late summer and we're getting ready to plant our fall planting, which is our hunting plots. And can you walk me through how you are terminating your spring plot, when you're doing that, and what you're thinking about when we plant this next version or this next round?
Right. Definitely. So if you have a drill, you can drill right through the spring mix. They call it planting green. You can fire that thing up with your tractor and drive right over it and plant in between it. And you're going to kill some of the spring mix by running it over. Some of it's going to mature and die out with frost, etc. And you don't use any sort of herbicide. You're just literally keeping living roots in the soil all the time. It's pretty cool. Again, it looks a little messier, but it depends what your goals are. What I do with the equipment I have, which is pretty average for every a lot of people that I run or talk to, I'll go in there normally in August. Normally I'm in August. I'm playing the weather. I'm looking for that rain. I want to make sure that I have a good rain coming. So sometime in August, because I want to give my brassicas some time to grow that are in the mix. And if you're only cereal grains, you can wait a little bit longer, even September. So, but since we're talking diverse mix here, I try to hit the middle of all of it. I'll go in there. So now I'll have a 4 or 5 foot standing spring food plot, tall as me. I guess I'm taller than 4 or 5 foot, but right in that area that I'm going to be with my I'm 4'2", and be driving through with my ATV, and I have a salt spreader for ice on the front, and I just fill that thing up, and I broadcast through the standing mix, and now all that seed is getting falling down in between all these plants down to the ground and or close. Then I come through and I terminate it. I have an ATV cultipacker, works pretty good. It has a roller crimper attachment on it that works pretty good. Herbicide, I've used herbicide because that works great. And really, if I'm using herbicide and I'm doing this system, I'm using it twice a year max. And really, that's a lot better than what I've done in the past. And I'm trying to go to once a year soon. Maybe no use of that a year. But long story long, spread your seed, terminate with either a crimper and roll that down, and terminate those plants on top of your seeds. You can spray, do a combination of both. Or again, back to the mower. You can grab a mower, and that's where that throw and mow came from years ago. You're mowing, and all this dead plant matter, what we call thatch or duff, is covering up your seeds and acting as if you planted them under the dirt. So then you need that rain. So that's pretty much how I would do that. It's pretty standard. You're just, instead of covering your seeds with dirt, you're covering it with dead plant matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's really key to make sure you broadcast first before knocking down any of that stuff, right? Because if you knock down your spring planting first, then your seed never makes it beneath it, right? So that timing is pretty key. Your order of operations can really mess things up, right?
It can, with a diverse mix like that, where we have peas and oats and big seeds in there. That's why I do it that way. I've done it the other way though too. With if you're just planting like brassicas and clovers, I've sprayed first, let it die for 2 weeks, and then just wait for that rain, and then run out there, and the smaller seed with a good rain can get down there as well. But now you're starting to depend on how much thatch layer do I have, how much soil is exposed. It can get a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
So I do it like you said. I do it prior, and then I terminate over top.
Okay. And all right, so we've got the process. It's such a cool, simple, cheap way to do it. Like, you don't need any big equipment to do it like this. You really could do it with, you almost don't even need you could do this with a backpack sprayer or over your shoulder broadcaster, and that's basically it. I mean, you don't need to have a tractor. You don't need to have an ATV. An ATV helps a lot with certain parts of this, but you don't need it. I mean, that's pretty darn cool. What if, again, I know I used your carbon load, I think you call it, or whatever the heck it's called, your fall blend last year. I had some issues with water flooding, but the stuff that did came up really good. And I ended up having a mature buck in there a bunch, which it's a story I actually haven't told on the podcast yet, but I almost killed a mature buck with my 4-year-old this year. Twice. And it was revolving around this spot that you and I, worked on planning last year, which is a story for another day. I'm not going to tell the story of this particular hunt until I kill this deer, which hopefully will happen someday. But what if someone's trying to, do something like this themselves, or if they are, if they already have some stuff and they're wondering, hey, will this work for a summer planting no-till like this? If I want to do this year-round cycle, what are the key elements of this kind of fall blend in your mind?
Key elements being like seed types, or what's it bringing to the table in general?
I guess both. So what general categories of seed would you want in a fall mix? And you can speak to what you guys use yourselves or otherwise, and then, and why.
Oh, first of all, if you would have killed a mature buck with a 4-year-old in a vitalized food plot, I'd be high-fiving you all the way down to holy cow. I can't wait to hear that story.
Hopefully it happens this fall.
Now, I tell you what, I brought my 4-year-old out like 6 times, and we killed a doe. No, we killed 3 does together. But it wasn't for lack of a challenge. So to get a mature buck in bow range, holy cow, well done. But to answer
this was with a gun. It was with a gun.
Oh, it was okay. Well, still, yeah. You understand the 4-year-old and the deer blind.
Still was a miracle to be close to pulling it off. Still a miracle.
Exactly. So for the fall load, we like to. The main goal of this was to just cycle nutrients, like Grant talks about, with whatever seed blend you go to, and get off of the fertilizer and the herbicide. What's actually what I've learned from the process is this is super attractive to whitetail, more so than I would have ever thought. I'll be the first to admit it. But now that I know more about it and know what's in it, I understand. So in the fall mix, we do a 16-way. We have, I hope I get this right here. We have like 4 or 5 clovers. We have 4 or 5 grains, like cereal grains, and we have 4 or 5 brassicas. We have, that's in general is pretty much what it is. There's different turnips and brassicas. There's, buckwheat, oats, wheat, rye, triticale, and then, you have your different types of Dixie Crimson clover, medium red clover, frosty berseem, some good name brand stuff. But in general, it's a mix of clover, brassicas, and grains for the most part. And what that does, you mentioned it earlier with kind of insurance policy. We had a drought year this past year. And finally, when we started getting that rain in October, boom, here it comes. And the deer noticed that. And I was just blown away by how they can, again, selective browsers tell what is diverse, where to go, which food plot to walk across to get to which other one. It's really very cool. So those are kind of the principles there. Is just you have something for each part of the season. You have brassicas for late. You have grains for early, and clover for browse tolerance. I'm not sure if that answered your question fully or not.
Yeah, no, you covered it. And then do any of those clovers, I got to believe some of those clovers will be greening up again in the spring before my spring planting of the next round. So I'm getting year-round coverage of some kind of food out there. Is that right?
Yeah, living roots in the soil all year long is what we're trying to do here. Up here, it's tough in February, right? But like down south, it's a different story. Those guys have it going on with the longer planting seasons all the time. So that's the idea. And in the spring, that rye is going to bolt, that wheat's going to bolt up, your clover is going to start popping up again, and you're going to have the first green food source out of anybody around. That's kind of what we try to do with everything with our properties is be the outlier, be the exception. In terms of your terminology, be the icing on the cake. You don't need to be the 40-acre cornfield that holds all the deer, but you can get them to swing in and spend some time there while you're in the tree stand. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, we are running out of time, so there's like a whole bunch of other things I was thinking I wanted to talk about, like a whole other property you have that you've been working on that we didn't even get to cover.
We didn't even get there.
No,
yeah.
but I guess that means we're going to have to do this again. Man, I appreciate talking through all this stuff. It's really fun to get to talk through these ideas and talk to someone who's proving them on, not a big, huge, giant farm, but doing it on 15, doing it on 70, doing it like anybody else, but doing it without tractors and no-tills. I mean, you're doing it very simple, very basic budget kind of stuff. So it just, I think, gives myself hope, and I think a lot of people, that this is something that's available to just about anyone. And I appreciate that. So before we wrap it up, though, really quick, Jared, can you give us the quick scoop on where we can, learn more about your content, consume your content, learn more about the seeds, all that stuff? Where can we get it?
If you want to hear more about this habitat stuff, we talk about it all year long. Habitat Podcast. Again, I'm very simple. Habitat Podcast. Find that on all of the iTunes and Spotify's of the world. Habitatpodcast.com. And we've had you on there a couple times. It's what we nerd out on all the time. We love it, and we talk about making your deer hunting property better with the use of habitat improvement. As far as the food plot stuff, that is called Vitalize seed. The idea behind Vitalize is to put strength and energy back into something. That's what we're doing with our soil and our wildlife. So vitalizeseed.com. If you have any questions, we pride ourselves on service. So call us up, email us. We'll take your call. We'll take your email, take your soil test. We'll help you out. Feel free to reach out. You will hear back from us at vitalizeseed.com. And Mark, just thank you again, man. Had a great time chatting with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's good to catch up again, and hopefully we can talk more again soon while standing over some dirt, or maybe hopefully not dirt. Hopefully it's living roots and something growing, and we're talking about the next round and continuing this food plot process. So thanks, buddy.
You bet. I'll see you this spring.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you. Hope you found this one interesting and inspiring. I hope maybe you were going to go grab a chainsaw or a shovel or your UTV or something and head outside and get to some of these projects. Spring and summer is going to be here before we know it. So let's get out there and get started. And with that said, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.